everyone, this is Lomi, and last week I mentioned wanting to make an outfit to go with my doll Laele's new Ita bag. I'd put it off because I couldn't get fabric I liked, and that unfortunately didn't change this week, so I ended up abandoning my plans to draw a pattern and decided to completely wing it using leftovers and scraps instead. I knew I wanted something Wa Lolita inspired in pastel goth colors, and I had just enough of this purple to cut out the upper part of my yukata pattern. It'll come just down to the doll's hips and still have the full-size sleeves. Aside from that, I found a nice-sized rectangle of very linty black fabric and some strips of the purple and a black in my scrap box. I also found a strip of black and white gingham, and it gave me some ideas. I got started with the skirt, which meant taking my big black piece and giving it a rolled hem at the bottom edge. This piece is about 3 feet long and reaches from my doll's waist to her knees. The strips of purple and black are also about 3 feet long each. After I get the main skirt fabric hemmed, I finish the narrower strips of purple with a zigzag stitch to prevent fraying, then just fold up the edge 1/4 of an inch to finish it. So, winging an outfit means, aside from the yukata pattern for the top, I have no pattern to work from, and I ended up putting my design sketch aside for now too. I didn't really know where I was going with this, and for a bit I wasn't sure how it would work out. I felt pretty nervous about how this might come together, but I decided I was just going to trust my instincts as I worked, make things up as I go, and improvise whenever I hit roadblocks. For the strips of purple that were only about 2 inches wide, I decided to join them to make one long strip and then use it as a ruffle on the bottom edge of the skirt. I figured I could alternate colors somehow between the black and the purple. I'd tried gathering the purple strip once by pinching the thread on top of the machine and forcing it to gather that way, but the thread kept snapping, so instead I used the method of gathering where I sewed across the top of the strip with a long stitch length and then pulled the bobbin thread to gather the material. I had initially had some reservations about sewing everything with black thread, but I decided it would help tie everything together, and would also make things easier because I wouldn't have to change thread between colors of fabric. After I did the purple ruffle, I thought I could use my 2-inch wide black strips to make a ruffle the same way, finishing the edge with a zigzag and then folding the edge up and sewing it in place, and also joining the 2 strips. I started to gather the top edge of the black and figured I could attach it to a 4-inch wide strip of the purple, so I finished the wider purple strip and then decided I didn't like how the black looked at the edge of the ruffle. So instead, I ended up cutting the purple into another pair of 2-inch strips, and I sewed that onto the bottom edge of the black strips to create the illusion of multiple layers. I thought I had a clip of that step recorded, but I guess I don't. I attached the black ruffle with its new purple edge to the middle of the skirt, so there would be a gap underneath where the base black skirt would show. But that left me with an ugly edge on the top of the black ruffle, where it was only finished with a zigzag stitch and was still pretty raw. So I found a purple ribbon that matched my fabric, and I just put that on over the top of the ugly edge. For the waistband, I used a boring rectangle of black fabric that was long enough to go around my doll's waist with enough of an overlap that I could add a snap closure. I gathered the skirt and pinned the waistband to the front with right sides together and attached it that way. At this time, the sides of the skirt weren't finished yet, aside from having been zigzagged so it wouldn't fray. I pinned the sides together and left about 1/3 of it open at the top so the skirt would fit over her really wide hips. I stitched the sides together to create the back, then folded the edges of the opening and the waistband in by 1/4 inch, and sewed that shut to create a tidy back opening. The overlap in the waistband will be enough to close the back of the skirt too. Finishing the waistband was just a matter of folding in the top edge, then folding the whole thing over on itself so all the raw edges of the skirt's top were inside the waistband. At this point, I wasn't super confident in how the skirt was turning out, and I kind of had to give myself a pep talk with a reminder that sometimes you just have to trust the process. Sometimes it looks like a mess, or you aren't sure how it'll come together, but letting creativity just flow as it pleases is usually going to give you the results you're happy with in the end. At the very least, it'll give you a learning experience, so it's hard to go wrong. When it came time to work on the top, I knew I wanted ruffles for the edges of the sleeves. I considered using lace, but I wasn't content with the lace I had, so I dug out some black ribbon left over from a project I did probably 10 years ago. I wasn't about to ruffle ribbon by hand though, so I got out my ruffler foot and let it do the hard work. The ruffler can sew the ruffle onto fabric as it goes, but I decided to ruffle the ribbon on its own because the slick satin sometimes doesn't ruffle right, and I figured there would be some places that I would need to fold by hand. Once I had enough ribbon ruffled, I finished one of the long sides of the sleeves with a zigzag stitch and turned the edge in 1/4 inch to make a hem, but instead of finishing it then, I pinned on the ruffle so I'd only have to do one seam. This meant being a little more cautious while sewing, and I found using my angled tweezers really helped keep the ruffle positioned the way I wanted it, which was important for those hand-folded places where it had skipped ruffles. I finished the other edge of the sleeves once I was done, then moved on to assembling the top. I didn't really do anything too different from how this pattern is usually assembled, and I think I did a much better job of filming the process the first time I did it on camera, so I won't share the whole thing this time. Instead, I'll drop a link to the yukata instructions I made previously so you can see the construction of this part much more in depth and a little bit slower than I went this time. One thing I did do differently with the top was once the collar was on and top stitched, I used a decorative stitch to add a diamond pattern to the collar, just for a little extra something that I thought would help bring the outfit together. Like I said, it's just been a matter of trusting my instincts with this project, and it definitely seemed like it was going to be a much needed special touch for this particular outfit. I also left the end of the sleeves completely open so the ruffles would be more visible and prominent. Otherwise, the construction is about the same, aside from it just being hip length instead of floor length. I considered adding decorative stitching along the bottom edge of the top as well, but then I decided it would probably be too much, so I just stuck with what I already had done. The last thing to do was create the obi, but I didn't want to mess with one that would actually be tied. Instead, I decided to make a fake one that would just snap shut in the back. I started by folding my gingham fabric strip in half and sewing it shut. I turned it right side out and then moved on to the main part of the obi, which is just a plain black rectangle that's big enough to go around my doll's torso with an overlap in the back. Most of this wasn't measured, which is part of winging it, I guess. I wasn't positive how I wanted to assemble this at first, because the scrap I was using wasn't long enough to have an opening at both ends. I opted for just sewing the long edges shut and leaving the one end open, with a nice fold at the other end. I pinned the gingham strip down the center of the black piece. On one end, it could tuck inside the open end of the black piece, but the other end was just a fold, so I opted for just trimming that with pinking shears, and then folding the end of it under itself. This would give me a tiny pocket between the layers that I would need for the final touch, which was a piece of purple cording. I cut the cording with just enough extra length that I would have tails that could be tucked under the gingham strip, then sewed down one end to fasten it in place. I sewed down one long edge of the obi, then top-stitched the gingham strip in place. Once it was secured, it let me tuck the other end of the purple cord between the black fabric and the gingham fabric. It ended up being really hard to get it to stay where it was supposed to, so tweezers ended up being really useful again. Then I just had to top stitch the other edge, sew on some snaps, and everything was done. As soon as I had the outfit actually on my doll, my concerns about the outfit not working out or not coming together totally disappeared, and my biggest concern became that I only have white platform boots for Laele and not black ones. The outfit looks great with that Ita bag from Daymare, and the colors ended up working beautifully with the pastel goth pens too. In the end, I'm really happy with how everything came together for this outfit, and I think the next thing to do is get her some matching boots. And that's all for today though. Thanks for watching. Bye.